All right, I'm Jose Salviati, editor at TheBeachBasket.net. He's Steve Purciello, a longtime educator, vice principal, high school coach, and athletic director. And this is the 13 Rules Overtime podcast. It's the off season, the Olympics are going, but there's so much more to talk about in this great game that we all love. This is a show where we're going to discuss the NBA stars from the 60s, 70s, and 80s by talking to someone who actually watched them play. These are players who you've heard about. You might have seen some grainy footage on YouTube, but you really don't know a lot about them. And that's been true for me as we've gone through this journey on the Overtime podcast. We're going to talk about what made these players special, what player today most resembles that player, and what is Steve's greatest memory about that player. Steve being the guy who's actually grew up watching them play, which is pretty cool. Today, we've discussed NBA greats like Will Chamberlain, Sam Jones, Rick Barry, Pistol Pete Maravich, Jerry West, and Bill Russell. Today, we're going to discuss someone who to me is a bit of an unsung hero. This is an NBA great who generally is not talked about in GOAT conversations. And when you rattle off the all-time greats, he's on the list, but he's not one of the first names that comes to mind. Not necessarily the tallest, fastest, or most gifted player, but an incredible athlete who was an absolute winner. He was an 8-time NBA champion, an NBA Finals MVP, 13-time NBA All-Star, and 5-time All Defensive First Team player. Today we'll discuss Hondo, John Havlicek. So let's start. You watched him play, and I know this is your team, and we bring up a lot of Lakers and a lot of Celtics, and that's because they dominated the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're going to try and balance that out a little, but this was an all-time. He started and ended his career in Boston, all-time great, and you rank him pretty high in the all-time list for the Celtics. What made John Havlicek special?
He never stopped running if you watched his games. He also did it all. He was a great defender. He also was a great scorer. Scorer, not shooter, scorer. Knew how to score, and he won. He won after Russell was gone. He won 2 more titles after that. In college at Ohio State, he won a title also with a couple of guys you might have heard of. Jerry Lucas was a teammate, and Larry Siegfried, who played with the Celtics for a while and was a decent backup guard, as well as they had this other guy on that team, by the way, I'll mention, some guy who made it a little bit in a different way, Bob Knight. He was on that Ohio State team as well.
He was a teammate of Havlicek's?
Yes, at Ohio
I
State.
didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
And they had another guy, Mel Newell, who played in the ABA a little bit. He might have played a little bit with the NBA, but he also, the Cincinnati team was considered great. The interesting thing was they didn't, so Havlicek played another year. He was a junior when they won the title. They lost to Cincinnati after that, which we know Cincinnati had. Oscar.
Big O. Yeah.
Yeah. But then he went on to the Celtics. In the beginning, he was a sixth man. Boston, Red Auerbach established a tradition with a sixth man. His first sixth man was Jack Ramsey. His belief was you take a guy off the bench and you change the whole game around by him being a difference. And Havlicek became the next sixth man after Ramsey, and he was great. He was always coming off the bench until Russell retired. That's, I believe, or maybe 69 is when he began to start. And from that point forward, for the next 9 or 10 years, until he retired, he was a starter. But he was a sixth man originally. And that kept his minutes down because one of the other things that Havlicek did, we talked about Wilt a couple weeks ago about his minutes. Havlicek played. He didn't come out of games. And I was looking at something, and just starting in 1969-70, he averaged 41.6 minutes, 71, 45.4,
Yeah.
72, 45.1, 73, 42.1, and 74, 40.1. So if point 0.7. But if you look at that, only Wilt was the guy who can do that. He did it, and he would play. They never took him out. And he was considered perpetual motion. He was always moving and always a problem to defend because he was always somewhere. In 69, he carried Boston offensively in those playoffs against the Lakers. Yeah, against the Lakers in that 7-game series. My fondest memory, and I just Boston won the title in 74 and 76. They would have won in 73 had he not have gotten hurt. Now, in 73, in game three, he dislocated his right shoulder, his shooting arm.
Yeah.
In 73, in game four of that series, he did not play. The Knicks fans, when they saw him come out in street clothes, they were cheering. Now, in that game, Boston lost in overtime to go down 3-1 in the series. Now, that's a famous double overtime loss that the two referees took a lot of abuse from Tommy Heinsohn, Boston's coach, because it seemed like Heinsohn always complained about everything, but it seemed like down the stretch they didn't get their fair share of calls. Havlicek came back and played in game 5, 6, and 7. Game 5, he scored 18 points playing left-handed,
Right.
which tells you how great he was. Boston won. Game 6, Boston won. Havlicek was not nearly as good, only scoring 9 points. Game 7, back in Boston, everybody figured Boston was gonna pull this one off. Boston got blown out by the Knicks, and the Knicks went on to win the title. Have Havlicek been healthy, they would
Yeah.
have probably won that series. In 74, again, he played, they won the title. And he was the MVP of the series. And as well in 76, they won another title. He was the MVP. That was with JoJo White and Dave Cowens and Paul Silas, who was pretty good also, and Don Chaney and Don Nelson, who was a great Celtic. But they also won a couple more titles with Havlicek really being the captain and the star of the show. His number was retired, and he just it was one of them people you watch until he's not that good, but then in totality, holy
Yeah.
jeez, what a great player, and you realize that. Now, we talked about this before. In my mind, and I've seen a lot of Celtics over the years,
Mhm.
this is arguably the 3rd best Celtic of all time.
That's
That's
shocking to me. That's
well,
shocking.
first me is Russell and Bird, but
Right.
then you have Havlicek. You can argue Cousy, you can try Sam Jones, you can throw a lot of different people, Kevin McHale,
Mhm.
do that, but the thing I'll say back to you on each of those names you're bringing to me, this guy was the number 1 guy in the 2 titles. Were they? No, they weren't.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
that I'll come back with. Cowens and White are Hall of Famers, they were great, but think about this with Havlicek, and I think we talked about it a little bit before. To show you how great an athlete, he was drafted by the Cleveland Browns
Yeah, that's crazy.
as a receiver and got cut, but
That's crazy.
that's how good an athlete he was.
Yeah. I'm blown away by the minutes, right? And I want to spend a little bit of time on that because, I know baseball and you follow baseball. Nolan Ryan would regularly throw 200, not regularly, but he had been known to throw 200 pitches in a game. And other players from that era. And obviously today you get to 80 and the coaches they're calling the bullpen. Obviously you can throw 200 pitches and you're okay. You obviously you can play 40 minutes and you're okay. What happened? What is it about longevity? Or is it about these guys? Nolan Ryan obviously is just a unique animal. Havlicek, Wilt, these are just unique players. Not everybody can do it. What's your take on that? Does that
I
make
think
sense?
I think a couple things. First of all, agents got involved, and by that, you don't want them to play a lot. You don't want them to get hurt because each year they get another year of pay. There wasn't a lot of money being made in the 60s and 70s. So
Right.
these guys weren't getting paid a great deal, so they gave it all. Here's a guy with a dislocated shoulder playing in a playoff series.
That's crazy.
But that's what they did. Havlicek, interestingly enough, scored a lot of his points off his motion. He just kept moving, and he
Mhm.
would get layups on cuts and all kinds of things that would just like were incredible. And he just was much better than what he showed. And he was just a great player with them.
The motion thing is the other thing that kind of stuck out to me because when I think of players like that, I think of Reggie Miller, right? Who's always running around somewhere. I think of JJ Redick, right? Who was always running around. But neither one of those two players was 5-time, defensive first team. So that obviously the point I'm making is it's one thing to run around on one end of the court, but it sounds to me like Havlicek was running around on both ends. Right?
Yeah.
That's crazy. And doing it for 40 minutes. That boggles the mind.
He did it all. It's interesting how you had to get a Laker into this when you said JJ Redick, which is just not surprising, let's put it that way. But JJ Redick and Miller did a different thing. Havlicek scored a lot of easy layups and things like that on cuts.
Right.
Those 2 guys were guys who came off screens looking for the open shot. They were both good
Right.
shooters. Miller, great shooter. Reddick was a good,
Right.
and so it was a little different type game, and neither one of them were known as defensive stoppers in
Exactly.
any way. And Havlicek was, if you go back to '69, I don't remember the exact numbers in that playoff series against the Lakers. In game
Mhm.
1 and 2, Havlicek had a score. West went crazy. He was 50 and 40 in the first 2 games. But Havlicek had to be like 40 and 30 in the first 2 games. He was doing what he did. Lakers won those 2 games, but he was Boston's offense in that series, and they won. Havlicek, when Boston came back in the series against Philly that we talked about in, what was that, '68, Havlicek was the guy who was scoring ridiculous numbers in game 6 and game 7. I think he was almost had a triple double in game 7 in that series when Boston beat Philly 100-96. So the things he did didn't get noticed, but they were incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. He sounds like the kind of player who did what you needed done at the time, right? Swiss Army knife. Right?
Yeah,
See, you need somebody to lock down, defend, he could do that. You need someone to hit a big shot, he could do that.
I think what people just they just don't realize, like we said, the champion, he was an all-star 13 times. These numbers are just crazy. So people don't understand or realize how great he was
Yeah.
throughout that time. By the way, his name Hondo, you know where that came from, don't you?
No idea.
Red Auerbach named him that after John Wayne.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, which was a very interesting little tidbit to look at about Havlicek.
I did not know that. This is yeah, I love having this conversation about these players because again, for me, I learn a lot. These are guys I've heard about, and I got to watch just a little bit of Havlicek's career. I started being a fan as he was finishing up his career. But this is by far the best part for me, and that is, and we're going to show some
Well,
highlights.
before we do that, the one
Okay.
thing we didn't mention was, and I know you're gonna show the highlight,
Mhm.
the biggest thing that he's probably most known for is stealing the ball. Let me just set that up before you show it.
Okay.
Boston, the Philly had just scored to cut it to 1. There was 5 seconds, I believe, left. Russell took the ball out, and back then, the baskets had guide wires going back. Russell takes the ball out. He throws it off one of the wires that's out of bounds. So now Philly's got the ball under their own basket with 5 seconds left with Will. Oh my God. It looks
Get the
like
ball in and it's over.
game 7 with the whole thing on the line. And now Hal Greer's about to take it out. Go ahead. You want to play it?
And apologies to those that are listening, but you'll be able to hear a little bit about this. But we're actually watching the video, and he still has the wherewithal to take the shot,
Right.
and he's surrounded by fans.
I think that's a timepiece because look at the people on the court. In today's game, the players would never, they'd be
Right.
running for their lives. And just the whole thing that was fascinating, the timepiece, I guess, would be the best way to put it. But that play there, and Johnny Most kept saying Havlicek stole the ball. Johnny Most, if you don't
Mhm.
know, was the announcer for the Celtics for many years. And he he was a character in his own right. We could do a show on him. I think he used to call Kevin Rulett and Rick Mahorn McFilthy and McNasty. He had names for other teams, players.
Nice.
He was just, but anyway, he coined that Havlicek stole the ball, which made him famous as well at the time. And Most was the announcer into the '80s, I believe. But that steal is what people remember him for. But boy, he did it all. There he is there, hitting the jumper and just doing things that just were incredible. And he could shoot, but he just did other things, and if you watch, he's always moving.
Yeah. So who today is most like this guy?
I don't
Is there any
I
player?
don't think you'll see anybody that can do the things he does. You brought up those 2 players. One was a Laker of some sort, and one was Reggie Miller. but he did it on both ends. So it's very difficult to even think of somebody that could do it like he did and play the minutes he played. Um,
Right.
just incredible. Today's players, see, there's a cut. Today's players don't score off cuts. Today's players usually take the ball, the great ones, and take somebody one on one and beat them. Havlicek, like I said, he didn't do anything great, but he did everything. He defended great, but he was
Yeah.
different in that way. So it's very difficult to even compare him to somebody from today.
Not a modern day player, but and let me give you one that comes to
Sure.
mind from the 80s. This is also a multi world champion, phenomenal defender, and a guy who put up 30 on the Celtics once, and that's Michael Cooper. Come close?
Somehow I knew it was going to be a Laker, but the Michael Cooper was not nearly the offensive player that John Havlicek was.
True. Yeah.
That would be the big difference. By the way, if
Yes.
you watch him shooting there and look at the rims, they weren't even breakaway back then. That didn't come until after Dawkins and Shaq broke the rims. But,
Yep.
yeah, they weren't even breakable. So that tells you about the how much stronger and better jumpers and all that stuff that the players are today. So it was interesting also. But I guess Cooper defensively, but again, to expend the energy that Havlicek did in the game, I don't
Yeah.
think there's anybody that's ever done that.
Yeah.
If I remember right, they used somebody put something on him to figure out how many miles he ran during a game, and I
Yeah.
think it was over 9 miles, that he did, and I'm not positive on that, but I remember they were trying to study, like, how much motion
Right.
he utilized.
Yeah. That's wild. That's wild. Like I said earlier, right? The best part of this show for me is learning about these players and trying to fit them into today. And this is the first guy that we really didn't have an apples to apples comparison. And
No,
we never have apples to apples, but we always come close. You always can name somebody. This is the first guy where you're saying there's nobody like him. That's crazy. That's
well,
very cool.
I think the game of basketball back then, offensively, there was more pattern and less option for a player. Now there's more options, less patterns. So the one-on-one skills weren't there. Some of the film you showed Boston setting screens, getting him shots, where in today's game, yeah, they do that for good shooters, but the LeBrons, they give them the ball and say, "Cream, make a play."
Yeah,
And so there's a difference in the game today and then.
got it. And that it's to be stated for the record that you brought up a Los Angeles Laker. That's not me. It was you. I'm
You
just
know,
calling it out.
I made a mistake.
All right, let's end it on that note. Always fun to talk basketball. It doesn't matter whether it's on season, off season, playoffs, Olympics, and it's great to look back and find out a little bit more about these honestly phenomenal players. They were not just plumbers and construction workers. These
No,
guys were talented basketball players. Hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about John Havlicek. I certainly did. Join us next week when we talk about some other NBA great. If you've got somebody you'd like to talk about, you'd like to learn a little bit more about, man, shoot us a comment, subscribe. All that stuff just means the world and it helps a ton. We'd love to hear from you. But if you don't, we'll find somebody. There's still some great players to talk about out there. Make sure to join us next week on 13 Rules Overtime. We'll talk then. Thank you.
thank you.